The Wrong Way Home: Uncovering the Patterns of Cult Behavior in American Society by Arthur Deikman. Chapter 2, Part 2. Clara had hoped when she left the group, Hugh would also, but he did not. Although he knew that as long as he stayed, he would not see his child, since contact was not allowed between those in the group and those who had left. Hugh: for some reason, I'd made a vow to stay a year, no matter what happened. I was going to go on and do great spiritual work. Hugh was expected to have no contact with Clara, to give her no money, no support, just to wipe the slate clean. He was told that Clara had left the group because she had become identified with her evil part, that all the good qualities she had were left in the group. Hugh: luckily, we had this wonderful friend. I wasn't about to abandon Clara, so I sent money through her. There was contact with this woman friend from both of us. I would go there for dinner, and we would talk a little bit about Clara, and I would say, "Is Clara angry at me?" And she said, "Oh, Hugh, Clara loves you so much." And she would say the same thing to Clara. So slowly, over those months, there was an indirect healing or reconnection. After several months, Clara sent a letter to Hugh through their mutual friend, secretly apologizing for what had happened and sharing her distress over the events. Hugh phoned Clara, and over the next few weeks they had several clandestine contacts. Hugh: there was the beginning of trust and love flowing again between us, and Clara asking me some wonderful questions. Not pushing me, but saying, "What do you see? Is this the kind of group that Christ would be near? Is this really the way people who love each other treat one another?" Hugh also contacted others who had left the group, setting up clandestine meetings at street corners or in cars. Having gained in confidence from these contacts, Hugh then wrote to the executive committee stating that he needed to make an arrangement to take care of his son, to spend time with him, and that he also needed time for his music. Hugh was immediately put back into quarantine. Hugh: it was the 6th or 7th time it happened. This was the first time I wasn't paralyzed with fear. I started cataloging my fears. I would sit there in quarantine in my room and write down all the different levels of fear I had. It was fascinating. Fear of inadequacy, fear of damnation, fear of becoming just a vegetable. They were giving me tapes of the meetings, and I would listen to the tapes, and I'd draw a line down the middle of the page, and I'd write down one side, the worldview that I was being put out of the group that I could buy, and then I would write down on the other side what I could actually see happening. It was fascinating because the things Alex was describing, what these subjective evil entities were supposedly doing out there to us, were precisely the things that he was doing in his relationship to the group. Right there, you could hear it on the tapes. I was holding these two worldviews side by side. That was where I felt the most schizophrenic, the most stressed. I had the image in the back. I had this image of the back of an envelope with "I quit" on it. And I knew that if I began to crack, that I would grab the nearest piece of paper, write "I quit" on it, stick it in Alex's mailbox, and run out the door. But I wanted to find out as much as I could about what was going on before I left. During the last year of Hugh's involvement, the group and Alex Monroe had deteriorated markedly. Paranoia pervaded the members' lives. Fantasies had acquired so much power that even sensate perception changed to accommodate the group's delusional world. Alex's focus on past lives had become more pervasive. His fantasies included a particularly malignant creature who was cruel, cunning, scheming, manipulative, and very smart, very beautiful, and an assortment of other characters, including devils with wings. A complete cosmos. Hugh: people would begin to see them, the devils, and then call teams to protect them. We had all become very paranoid by then. I would spend hours, 14 or 15 hours in a row, on the phone, protecting group members and fighting some subjective entity who was attacking somebody else. Barbara Barbara Monroe was the one who seemed to be attacked a lot. She would call and say this particular entity, Charlie, a big black devil with wings, was attacking her. We would call in the forces of light, and we would do a visualization. To fight the dark force, you would bring in an angel of light, an archangel with a sword. Light against dark and imagery. Barbara would get better, or she would get over her migraine headache or whatever. Each person had their kind of private devils. It would happen among the executive committee, and then we'd hear about it and have to clean it up. Each of the executive committee had his or her own devil. One had a panther-like cat, another this disembodied head, and another this dark archangel, and so forth. Such so-called subjective work had come to occupy more and more of the group's time, particularly as a team of 3 or 4 members would be giving support to meetings or processing sessions by conducting a group visualization of their own. Subjective work was extended to cover phone calls, not only within the group, but to people outside the group as well. The members could not go to sleep until protective measures were taken for members of the inner circle and for anyone designated as having trouble. Clara, at the end of the day's work, there would be a team that would call you and say, before you go to bed tonight, would you clean up Erica? Would you clean up Debbie? Clean up their clothes and shop and stuff. There would be this protection we would put around the whole group before we could go to sleep, and that would take forever. We'd be falling asleep. Hugh, by the end of my time in the group, we were doing subjective work almost exclusively. 14, 15, 16 hours a day. The executive committee was so paranoid, and Alex was so paranoid, he stayed in his room the whole time, and everyone else was in apartments, and the executive committee couldn't even meet in the same room together for fear that they would do numbers on each other. Trips, power trips, seduction trips, so forth. There were always teams cleaning up the executive committee, so the executive committee could not meet. Alex also was having to work with all 4 of them. There were only 4 executives left by then, all women. The men were gone. Alex and his women were all that was left. Hugh, I knew I was going to leave. The more I talked to Clara, clearer that became. I waited 10 days, and then a phone call came in the afternoon. It was Alex and another executive. Supposedly to talk about my letter. So they started in. I was able to stand up to Alex for about an hour. I told him, I'm in touch with my soul, but I see the group over here in a corner. I'm no longer connected to the group. He was furious. He attacked. I stood up to it for a while, and then I just went under. As we all did. The best you could do was pretend. Just try to bear it and hope it would be over soon. The processing proceeded, all by telephone. Alex portrayed Clara and Hugh's son David as interpenetrated by a devil. It was done through suggestions. Alex, are you thinking of going back to Clara? Hugh, well, that would depend, but certainly I want to have some contact with her around David. Alex, close your eyes and see Clara. Alex would then evoke from Hugh's memory all of the negative things that Clara had done to him. Alex, how do you feel about that, Hugh? Hugh, I feel angry. Then Hugh would set to the special catharsis room at the center where he ventilated his anger at Clara for 2 hours. Hugh, I knew there were 2 things going on. I was play acting it to some degree because I knew this was the kind of thing I would go through, and on the other hand, it was so powerful, it was real, and it did reinforce once again the negative image of Clara. It was a kind of shared fantasy, of paranoia, in which Alex's view of how things were would be infiltrated into the person's head through strong emotional reinforcement because he could not get this anger out. That night, I got out a lot of rage at Clara, which I'm sure was connected to the fact that I felt she had betrayed me. And he would feed the feelings of betrayal and anger with images and slanted questions. Who do you see behind Clara? Knowing full well that it was supposed to be one of Alex's imaginary characters. And what is she doing? And then, what do they, Clara and David, want to do to your heart? They don't want to love it, do they? It was that kind of leading question. He'd never say, they want to eat your heart, Hugh. He'd get you to say it, and then he'd reinforce it. Yes, yes, they want to eat your heart, and it's wrong. Hugh, it's a sin. It's wrong to love them. Alex implied that Clara and David just wanted my money and were loving me in order to get my money and not for myself. They don't deserve your love. They can't use your love. The people who need your love are the students in the training program. It was this kind of thing. Alex would give you a choice. He would say, well, you don't want to live that way selfishly, do you? And you'd say, no, I don't. Well, then, it was kind of a nod to psychological processing in terms of catharsis, making choices, intention, higher values, but it became increasingly Alex projecting whatever was in his mind into people. The processing continued for 8 hours. Although Hugh tried to fake compliance, he was terrified of the strong images that had been summoned. He could not prevent Alex from affecting him. I don't understand this, but it happened for other people too. At the end of these 8 hours, there was an experience of love for Alex, and his love for me, and a kind of intimacy that was very compelling. I apologized to him for making it hard for him, and that he'd have to spend these 8 hours with me. And then he wept on the phone, and I wept, and he said, oh, that helps so much. And I said how much I loved him. I woke up the next morning. It was all like I couldn't find my head. Everything that I had put together had been shattered. I'd been really beat up. I had been under severe attack from people who thought they were saving me from the devil. Looking back, it feels like a snake whispering in my ears for 8 hours. This ear is still slightly deaf. The hearing has never totally come back on this side. However, Hugh was prepared. He went back to the notes he had taken so carefully and reconstructed what had happened. The battle to leave was a struggle against intense fear. The point of highest tension for me was to figure out what reality system did I want to commit to. Alex was saying, you need to turn away from your child and Clara and never think about them anymore. There should be no contact, nothing, just turn away. I was afraid. Fear of damnation is what it finally became, and Alex would reinforce it. Images of outer darkness, gnashing of teeth, just a total and utter damnation. I had to go against that. I had to pit against that the principle that a father does not leave his child. I couldn't believe that God wanted me to leave my child for anything. I said, even if I am damned forever, even if I'm going to be cast into outer darkness, I'm not going to turn against David. That saved me, woke me up. I'm so glad. I'm so grateful. Despite this resolve, there were times during the last week when the pull of Alex and the group would threaten to overwhelm him. At one point, Hugh phoned Clara in panic. I could feel the maelstrom, a vortex, and I was going to lose my will and be sucked into the center of this thing. I could see in the center, this nice, cozy place where all your needs were taken care of, and it was loving. I remember writing down in big letters, I've got to get out of here. In the last few weeks before leaving Life Force, he was helped by talking with another group member, Jerry, although communication between them had been forbidden, about his perceptions of what Alex was doing. At last there was contact with someone inside the group who saw things the way I did. There was just an explosion of talk. Clandestine. After the work was over, we'd call each other up and talk. Finally, a week after the processing session, Hugh wrote a letter of resignation. The next morning, very early, he placed a copy in each member's doorstep and left the city. The word went out that I was the Antichrist, and that my resignation letter was to be picked up with tongs, put in another envelope, sealed and burned. Everything I'd ever given to anybody, loaned, a bed, a book, or whatever, were to be destroyed or turned in. The interesting thing was that the people who were there were feeling closer and closer to Christ while all this was going on. Hugh stayed in communication with Jerry, helping him to leave also. Hugh. Jerry would say, I'm sitting here and my whole body is shaking and trembling with fear. It's rising off the bed. My heart is shaking. If I bought the system, I would say that you were the devil and that you were seducing me away from the group. And I would say, okay, what's true? I'd just sit there. What's true? And he would gradually say, I know that's not true. We spent a long time on the phone where he would go through the same process that I'd gone through. It was like a buffer zone of terror around the group that a person had to cross. It was almost necessary to have a person on the outside. Jerry left the organization soon after. Hugh's leaving set off a chain of resignations. Each person who departed helped others to leave. A packet of letters of resignation was circulated among the graduate students, most of whom then left. With so many of the staff gone, the graduate school closed. Shortly thereafter, Alex Monroe and the remaining group members went underground, moving to another city where they were said to be spending their entire time processing each other. The story of Hugh and Clara Robinson illustrates what can happen when thought and perception come to be controlled by desire and fear. The psychological damage the Robinsons suffered in the cult process was extensive. Their sense of self-worth, emotional stability, and relationships with those closest to them were badly battered. Indeed, many months after leaving the group, the Robinsons were still recovering from the trauma of their experience. Readers may wonder how different Hugh and Clara were from themselves. After all, prior to joining Life Force, Clara had become very anxious. Hugh was disconnected, uncomfortable with his life, yet to us in the seminar, the Robinsons did not seem very different from most people. After further interviews, which I conducted myself, I found no reason to change that assessment. Although the world of Life Force may seem alien to most of us, in an important number of ways, Hugh and Clara's experience was not qualitatively different from that which occurs in everyday society, although it was more radical, more intense, and less subject to moderating influences, and consequently more pathological. Analysis of Hugh and Clara's experience and that of others involved with cults reveals 4 basic behaviors found in extreme forms of cults: compliance with a group, dependence on a leader, devaluing the outsider, and avoiding dissent. These behaviors are not distinct and independent, but interrelated. In my view, they arise in part from what I've referred to as the dependency dream, the regressive wish for security that uses family as model, creating an authoritarian leadership structure, the parent, and a close-knit exclusive group, the children. Since the leader parent has many of the insecurities of the follower child, reality must be distorted by both to maintain the child's illusion, or wish, that the parent can always provide protection, that he or she has no weakness. Dissent is stifled because it casts doubt on the perfection of the leader and special status of the group. Group compliance preserves security by supporting the beliefs crucial to the fantasy of superiority, beliefs which also explain the powers and entitlement of the leader and can no more be challenged than he or she. Outsiders, non-believers, are excluded and devalued, for they do not believe what the group believes. If the group and leader are superior, the outsider is inferior. Because the group boundaries are more permeable in everyday society, hidden, normal cult behavior is not as intense as in the overt cults, and in the relative importance of one or the other of these interlocking behaviors may vary considerably depending on the social organization being studied. In the next chapters, I'll describe how cult behaviors are manifested in everyday life in our society, using examples from large corporations, religion, psychiatry, the media, and government. I do not mean to imply that other levels of motivation are not active also, but they are conscious. The danger of the longing for the backseat of the car is that because it is usually unconscious, it can powerfully influence us in ways that are not recognized. We recognize an overt threat from powerful authorities, be it loss of a job, injury to self or loved ones, or imprisonment. Likewise, most people are very aware of the lure of money, fame, and power. However, we are not accustomed to recognizing the effect on us of the threats and rewards of childhood's world. The parental frown or parental smile, the invitation to play, or the exclusion from a game, the blissful comfort of being cared for. The dependency dream acts as an unseen regressive force, shaping our behavior to accomplish the desires of childhood while we are pursuing the goals of adults. It produces unconscious submission to the beliefs and demands of authorities. It leads us to seek assurance by repeating dogma, to attack outsiders, to ignore and devalue dissenting opinions. Unwillingness to disrupt the fantasy that we have a wise, strong parent in charge leads us to accept the limits of debate established by authorities and the beliefs upon which those authorities depend. Thus, the anxiety evoked by a cult situation is not often recognized for what it is. Even when fear of the leader is conscious, a person is not usually aware that it may be based on the persistence in adulthood of a child's desire and vulnerability, as much as on any realistic need or possibility of reprisal. Although a deprived or traumatic childhood may result in greater vulnerability to cult manipulation or deceit, the experience from childhood itself renders us susceptible to the blissful promise of a safe, secure way to return home. A continuum of behavior exists, from the People's Temple to Life Force, to rigid religious groups, corporate cultures, professional societies, and ordinary us-them categories. What I wish to stress is that not every group is a cult, but that cult thinking is the effect of psychological forces endemic to the human mind, and that these forces operate in everyday life of each of us. They distort perception, bias thinking, and inculcate belief. Our own behavior brings us closer to the experience of Hugh and Clara. Our own behavior brings us closer to the experience of Hugh and Clara than we would like to believe. Is the end of chapter 2.